In this video, I want to go over entering expenses in QuickBooks Online. This is going to be an introductory level video where I'm going to talk about how to enter expenses, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about how to know what category to use. I'll link any other videos that I think are relevant in the description. First, let's talk about what an expense is. Most people have a general idea of what an expense is, and it's basically just a cost that you need to pay in order to operate your business. Now, you might have some personal expenses that you think of when you think of the word expense, like your electric bill, your phone bill, your rent or your mortgage, and things like that. Businesses have bills also, but it usually gets a little more complicated because you really have to know what type of expense it is and how to classify it. In a business, we have different types of accounts. We have assets in this section, which are your bank accounts and other resources, buildings, things like that. Liabilities, which are debts. Equity, which represents the owner's investment in the business. And income, which is money earned from selling products and services. And then, of course, in this video, we're going to focus on expenses. Most programs that you use are going to have some accounts already in here set up, but you'll probably have to add accounts to make it more specific to your business. This sample company is set up as a landscaping business, and they have a lot of landscaping type accounts in here. So if you're a landscaping company, you might have some similar accounts. If not, you might have completely different accounts. I don't think I've ever seen two companies with the exact same chart of accounts. And there's really no right or wrong way to name your accounts. For example, this company has landscaping services as one of their income accounts, but you could have a lot of different things here. You could just have service income, you could have consulting services, you could have maintenance services. You know, there's so many different variations of account names. Now I'm going to add transactions manually at first, and you would just go to New, Expense, Check, Bill. That's how you add manual expenses. But you can also connect your bank or credit card account into QuickBooks. This does not actually record transactions. It just makes things a little more automated because it brings in some of the transaction details, and this will make things faster for you to enter transactions. I have a whole video on entering transactions right here. I'm going to talk a little bit about that also at the end of this video. First, let me demonstrate some manual transactions. So I'm going to click on New Expense, and let's enter an office supplies expense. So my payee would be the vendor, and you can add a vendor here, or you can use one that you already have set up. The payment account is simply going to be what account you use to pay for this purchase, or in this case, let's do credit card. And then down here, you would put the category. So this is pulling things from the chart of accounts. So you can use a category that's already in here, or you can add a new account right here. Now you'll see that I also have this items section. You have to turn this on, but this is using, instead of directly using the expense account, you're instead using something from the products and services list, which I do have another separate video about as well. Okay, so let's just say that office supplies were purchased from Amazon for $89.99. And that's it. That's all you have to do. You can put other details in here. You can put the payment method, and you can add new payment methods. You can add a reference number if you want. And then you can put any descriptions or memos if you want to. And then I usually copy paste and put it in both description and the memo, but you know, you really don't have to. Now this has to be turned on over here. If this expense was related to a specific customer, you could put that over here, and you can also mark something as billable to a customer. You would do that if you were going to add this expense to that bill. I probably wouldn't use office supplies as the category if I were to do this, because that would probably be a separate category that I would call reimbursable expenses. But I just wanted to point out that this is here. And that's a little beyond the scope of this particular video. And that's it. You can add more details if you want to. You can make it recurring if this is going to be, for example, a weekly or monthly expense. And then you can change the date also. Now, down in the bottom right-hand corner, you may not see it if the webcam is over it, but there's a save and close, and then there's a save and new option down in the right-hand corner. So I'm just going to save and close, and that's it. Now, if I go to the chart of accounts under the transactions menu, I can see this transaction if I go to the MasterCard. So there's that $89.99 expense, and you can see that the memo shows up in this on this screen. And then I can also go to the office supplies category and look at it there also, but it's going to look a little different. If I go to office supplies, instead of showing me the whole register, it's going to have me run a report. And this is what the report would look like. Okay, let's go back. Another thing I want to point out is that I put the vendor name in there because in QuickBooks it allows you to search for that specific vendor. So I can go to expenses vendors and go to Amazon, and I can see any transactions I've entered related to Amazon. Having the vendors page helps with consistency because you can go back and look at how you recorded things previously, and it's just a quick way to find that information. Let's do another Amazon example. I'm going to go to new expense. Now I'm going to put Amazon in as the payee, and you can see what happens. It actually brings up the last transaction, and that may help me if I'm always using the same account over and over for a specific vendor. It pulls up that information, and it also pulls up what payment account I've been using for that vendor. It does help that it pulls in this information because it can make things go faster, but at the same time you have to be careful because you may have used the credit card last time you spent money on Amazon, but this time maybe you used your debit card and it came from the checking account. So just be careful of that. But what I'm going to show you is how to split a transaction. Let me remove the previous stuff. Let's say you bought more office supplies, but then you also bought some supplies for a job, like some job materials. You can split an expense. The total was $100. 25 of that was office supplies. 75 of that was job materials. So I wanted to point that out, that you can split expenses. And then also another thing, if you're not paying attention, QuickBooks uses a transaction date according to the last transaction that I entered. So if I want to use a different date, I need to pay attention to that. Okay, so for this one, I'm just going to save and close. And that's it. Okay, let's just do a few other examples so I can talk a little bit about how to know what category to use. If you use an expense category that makes sense and sounds logical, you're probably doing it correctly. So let's just do a few more transactions. Let's do a meal. So they went for coffee, they met some clients, went for coffee. So that's what that transaction might look like. The payment account would be what account it's coming from. The payee would be that vendor. The payment date would be whatever date it was paid. And then the category would probably be meals and entertainment or meals for this. Now I want to point out that a lot of people think, well, if I was marketing or advertising while I was at that meal meeting with a client, then shouldn't that be marketing or advertising expense? It should not. You want to mark any meals as meals because there are different rules on what is deductible and what is not deductible. For example, some meals are only 50% deductible. So any meals you do want to put as meals. And then I'm going to go ahead and put a description. and save and close. Okay, let's do another one. This one we're going to do a travel expense. Now some companies do have multiple travel accounts. They might have travel meals, airfare, lodging, and so on. That's really just if you want to separate it like that. For this one, I'm just going to put in a general travel category. Change the date. I usually copy paste the description into the memo, but you don't have to do that. If there are any receipts to attach, that could be done here, and that's it. Any other details you want to put in, you can. So I'm just going to save and close this and move on to the next one. I think travel expenses are pretty obvious. Any travel that you do, such as flights, hotels, things like that, would probably be put in a travel category. Okay, but if you have automobile expenses, those are going to be separate. You would want to keep track of those separately. So that would be gas, maintenance, that you would probably not put those under travel. And that's mainly because automobile expenses are a little different. If you rent a car, that would be travel expense. But if you're putting gas in your car, that would be a separate category. So in this sample company, they have a separate account for automobile and fuel. So just keep in mind that you can either take a mileage deduction or you can deduct your actual auto transactions or expenses. So you do want to record those separately because they might be treated a little bit differently on the tax return. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, moving on, let's do a bank charge. A bank charge is usually going to be some kind of bank fee, credit card processing fee, or something like that. So I'm just going to do one for ABC Bank. The category would be bank charges, and then I would put the amount and the date. And save and close. Okay, let's do an example of an automobile expense. Okay, so for this one, I would want to specifically note that it was something related to automobile. And in this case, there's a subcategory for fuel. And that's it. I would just save and close. And then let's do a postage expense. So postage would be anything like mailing things to your customers, mailing flyers. If you mail flyers, you could probably put that under advertising also. So let's just do general postage expense. So you could have some kind of a category named postage expense or something similar. And then you could put any other details in here as well. Let's do another postage. So I'm going to go new expense. And this would be postage and delivery again. Okay, and that's it. I would save and close. Okay, let's talk about insurance expense. Let's add another expense. Now for insurance, some companies break down their insurance categories. They might have workers' comp insurance, professional liabilities insurance, medical insurance. So it's possible you have multiple insurance categories. In this particular sample company, they just have one main insurance category, and then underneath that they have workers' compensation insurance. So for this one, I'm just going to click on insurance, but I do see companies with multiple subcategories here. So that's it. I would just save and close. Let's do a software subscription expense. We're going to do an expense for Zoom video. So for this, you could have a software category. Some companies use office supplies and software expense. That's a common category that I see. You could put it under office expenses, or if you have some kind of subscriptions category, you could use that also. I personally like having some sort of software and subscriptions category. So we just save and close. Okay, let's go ahead and demonstrate writing a check to a vendor. So let's say you are paying your assistant as a part-time contractor and you're writing a check. You would have the payee be their name. The category would probably be something like contractor, which it looks like I have to add, if I can spell it. And you can see that I can just add this right here. I could use legal and professional fees or other business expenses. The detail type isn't super important. I don't see this in all softwares, but QuickBooks does do this. And that's it. I would save this, and I added an account to the chart of accounts right here from the check. And then I would put in any other details and the check number, the date, and things like that, and save and close. So I do recommend, if you have a contractor and you write them a check, I do recommend you enter it in QuickBooks as a check. And that's just because when you are ready to prepare 1099s at year end, it does make a difference whether you paid someone with a credit card or a check. Okay, and then I'm also going to show you how to enter vendor bills very quickly. You can see that there's already some examples in here, but I'm going to add one more bill. This is a vendor bill that is money owed to a vendor. And let's just say this is for equipment rental. They have a couple of equipment rental accounts. I'm just going to use this one. I don't recommend having account names that are exactly the same in different subcategories, because that just makes it so confusing and leaves so much room for errors. Okay, now you can see I can put a category or an item. If I wanted to add an item related to equipment rental in products and services, I could. That's a whole video in itself. So I'm just going to leave it as the expense category in this one. And then you would also want to add a bill number if you have one. And then you would add your descriptions, dates, and things like that also. So I'm going to save and close. And down here in the right hand corner, which you may not see if my webcam is in the way, but there's a save and close and a save and schedule payment option. So I can pay this through QuickBooks. I have not personally used that feature before, but it is something that is an option in QuickBooks. I'm just going to save and close. So now that puts it in the unpaid bills section. So let's go to that vendor just so we can look at it from the vendor screen. And you can add transactions within the vendor screen also. You don't have to do it up here. So up here at the top, it shows that there's $800 open and due. And down here, it says I can schedule a payment, or I can click on this little drop down arrow and click mark as paid if I'm paying that with a check or some other method outside of QuickBooks. So I'm just going to click on mark as paid. I'm going to put what account it came from. Let's say it was the checking account, and let's say it was a check. And it automatically clicked on the bill but I can uncheck this if I don't want it applied to the bill. I don't know why I wouldn't, but if you have multiple bills to be paid, you can change what bill the payment is being applied to. But in this case, they just have one open vendor bill and this is getting paid. Notice how it defaulted to the last payment date I entered, so I do need to make sure that payment date is correct. And then I'm just going to save and close. Okay, so now you can see I have the bill and the bill payment in here. And then I just want to show you one other type of transaction that you may run into. If you have a loan payment, you do want to make sure you split between the interest of that payment and the principal, which would be your payable. Okay, I'm going to save and close. Okay, now I entered all of those bills manually, but I want to go back to the bank transactions page where there were accounts connected. When you connect accounts, it does not enter these transactions into QuickBooks. All this does is connect with your bank or credit card and tell QuickBooks that these are the transactions that show up in your bank or credit card account. This can add some automation to entering transactions. Because you could see when I entered all those transactions manually, it can get really time consuming, but this can make things a little faster because you can click on, for example, this money received. I can enter details here and add, and it's going to add a deposit for me. Or I can match it to a customer invoice. And then for money spent, I can click on it and I can put the details in here and it will add an expense. I cannot add a check here. So if you're entering checks, definitely do it up here. But if you are entering expenses, it's fine to do it on this screen. The reason why it's so much faster is because, first of all, QuickBooks uses technology to match it to transactions that are already in QuickBooks. So if you have something that's already in QuickBooks, you don't want to add it again manually. You want to just match it to what's already there. Otherwise, you'll end up with duplicates. So you can either match it or create an expense or create a deposit. But it makes things go faster because some of the data is already here. The date, the amount, sometimes it'll bring up the payee if technology recognizes that it's something you've entered before. So I just wanted to point this out. I do have another video on this, which I'll link in the description, but if you can learn how to do the transactions, most of the transactions here, it will save you a lot of time. Now, one more example that I want to do before I end this video is a refund. When you pay for an expense and you get the money back, a lot of people are not sure how to categorize that. So here's this Amazon return back on the credit card. Remember at the beginning of the video, I entered an expense of $89.99 for office supplies. My rule of thumb, if an expense is returned or an item is returned, I'm going to record that deposit of money in the same category as I recorded the original expense. So the original expense was recorded as office supplies. So I am going to record the return in the exact same category. And I'm just going to add this. So I can click on categorize to see what I have categorized already. And you can see that it's right here. If I realized I made a mistake, I can undo that. Let's go ahead and just run a report real quick. I'm going to run a profit and loss. Okay, so several of the expenses we just entered are in here, plus some expenses that were already set up in the sample company. I'm going to go ahead and click on office supplies since that was the one that had the return. Here's office supplies. I can click on this number and it's going to drill down to show me all the transactions in that account. I guess that return was on June 1st. So here we can see that there was an expense of $25. I can click on that to see the whole transaction. It was the one I entered at the beginning of the video. Then there's the $89.99 expense, and then the credit, which subtracts back out. So the net effect of those transactions is just the $25 expense. So hopefully this video gave you a good idea of how to enter expenses. I do want to show you also real quick before we end the video, some of those expenses were able to be marked as billable to customers, and some had that item section. So I'm going to go to the gear icon and show you where those settings are. I go to account and settings. So under expenses, it says show the items table on expense and purchase forms. That is turned on. Track expenses and items by customer, make expenses and items billable. So all of those are turned on. If I want to change that status, I just click on the pencil icon and I can turn these features on and off and save. I hope this video was helpful. Be sure to like the video if you found it helpful. Be sure to subscribe if you want to see other accounting videos, and thank you for watching.